At the end of my freshman year at the University of Georgia, I was majoring in forestry. Resource management is my degree. I received a St. Catherine's Island Edward John Noble Foundation scholarship. And the Edward John Noble Foundation, that then owned St. Catherine's Island, paid for 3 years of college, my last 3, and after I graduated, I was hired to work on the island. In 1982, they made me superintendent, and last year they made me director of the programs. I've been working with David Hurst Thomas since 1975, because that's when I moved to the island full time. He began doing archaeology there in '74, so we like to compete with who got there first. And I said, well, I got there in '71, and he says, well, you didn't move here till '75. I was already doing work here, in '74. So anyway, we have that fun rivalry. But to put it in perspective, Dr. Thomas was, I think, 31, and I was 24. And we've been having fun working together and conspiring and seeing some really good stuff happen that he does with his program. The last individual who owned the island was a man named Edward John Noble. And Mr. Noble owned Lifesavers Candy and over the years, many other things. But he's very successful. He loved St. Catherine's. It was put into the Edward John Noble Foundation, so it was not left directly to his daughter. But she became the chairman of the board of directors for the Edward John Noble Foundation. And later in 1981, when the St. Catherine's Island Foundation was formed, she and her husband wanted the island to be in a Georgia-based foundation. Thought it was appropriate. So in 1981, when St. Catherine's Island Foundation became the owner of St. Catherine's Island. Mr. and Mrs. Larkin led all of the programs and sort of directed everything and made sure that grants were available from the Noble Foundation to fund pretty much everything from that time until now. Mr. Larkin died about a decade ago. Mrs. Larkin is now Mrs. Gibson, and she has semi-retired. But her family, her sons, 3 of her sons are very much involved. They're officers with the foundation. They are very excited about the programs. They get involved. And their children are now 3 of their children are now serving on the board. And they have other people on the board. There are attorneys to help keep everything straight. There's a scientist on the board. David Hurst Thomas is on the St. Catherine's Island board. And then below that, there's a scientific advisory committee to guide different research programs, to decide whether their appropriateness to the island, that sort of thing. And so there's a feeling of continuance. Dave Thomas is looking to PhD students while under his tutelage to sort of take up the mantle of the good archaeology that's been happening on St. Catherine since 1974. And the rest of us who've been around, we all sort of are conscious of the fact that our hair is now gray and we have less of it than we used to have. And so we're all thinking about, how to keep on, how to keep this collaboration that's been going on. It's so much fun to see geologists getting into the archaeology, or the archaeologist adding things to the information that the geologist didn't understand about the formation of the island, because, as Dr. Thomas likes to say, people arrived the next day. The island became an island, separated from the mainland about 5,000 years ago, and there were people there. We're learning things about the gopher tortoise history on the island from archaeologists, but the archaeologists are learning things about the type of landscape gopher tortoise need. So if there were gopher tortoise on St. Catherine's 5,000 years ago, what landscape were those Indians, were those people coming to if there were gopher tortoise there? Because a tortoise will only be in certain kinds of landscapes. So these collaborations, I think, are done better on St. Catherine's than any other place I've seen it happen, where scientists of different disciplines really get into each other's whatever they're doing, and no one minds asking someone, hey, what is that? Show me. In 1971, sort of at the height of the DDT problems, Georgia's last known bald eagle nest, I've heard rumors there might have been others that people kept a secret, but the last known bald eagle nest in Georgia was on St. Catherine's Island. And the eagles that pair continued to return to the island for several years. DDT was outlawed at that time, and they were unsuccessful. And then we noticed, this was 71, the last nest. In 1979, we began seeing eagles carrying sticks into a different part of the island. Another fellow and I, a couple of years later, we continued to look, but could not find a nest, but the birds, we would mark the lines on the map whenever we saw the birds. When they would flee where we were, we'd mark the lines to see where they were going. Well, eventually, within a couple of years, the state took us up in a state airplane, and we were able to find the nest. And they were very good at hiding it in a very tall tree, but with a thick understory, so we couldn't see it. That was very exciting. That was about the second active bald eagle nest. Ossabaw Island to the north had the first returning pair that was documented. Well, this year we had 6 active nests on St. Catherine's. I bet there's over 60 active nests in Georgia, which to me is very exciting because it shows that if you do make those environmental corrections like the outlawing of DDT, that things do come back. St. Catherine's went from 1 active osprey nest to 19 active osprey nests. Now when we have our Christmas bird counts, we would have the bird counter see how many eagles we counted, and we'd record the time because eagles are so big and they fly. We don't want to count the same eagle twice. We didn't want to err against, we want to err on the side of angels in our counts. Well, now what we do is first we start off with someone says, well, how many nests do you have? And we say, well, we have 6 nests. Okay, that's 12 adult eagles. How many immatures are there? And I said, well, I've been seeing all color plumages. I think there's a couple of first years, but I'm not sure. So then everybody then just records the times of the immatures to get a better count of how many adolescent birds or under 5-year-old birds we have flying around. And there might be twice as many of those around as we have adults. And of course, there's still fish in the waters, and the birds are finding enough to eat, and that's very exciting for me. They're also a talisman. I mean, the eagles were not there, and now they're back. You saw the Spanish mission site, Santa Catalina de Guale. Well, when we transplanted the palm trees, some of my staff thought it was the nuttiest thing that I had ever asked them to do. And we transplanted the palms. It took us a day. We did it all one day, and had the trees all guide off in the outline of the church. And I was kind of pleased with it, but everyone else was grumbling. And I thought, well, maybe this was a nutty thing to do. So I woke up early the next morning, not being able to sleep, thinking, well, I hope I haven't wasted Foundation's money. I had discussed it with the president of the Foundation, what I wanted to do, and the reason we did it was because of that request that we had from some Franciscans for a pilgrimage, and I wanted to have a place that felt like a church. So I went down to the site the next morning, and I sat on the stump that marks where the door used to be of the church, and as the sun came up behind me, I realized there was an eagle sitting in a tree in front of me. And as the sun, sort of the light hit me from the sun coming over the trees, the eagle left its perch, flew directly over me, and as it flew over, it kind of looked down and then went off. And I said, okay, the assurance is here. It's stamp of approval. The eagle thinks it's okay. I'm fine. I don't believe the ocean has risen much, but it's enough that storm tides lapping around the edges of the marsh that used to cause no damage are now eroding sites, pretty much the entire perimeter. And especially where Wamasee Creek flows by the mission. Well, Wamasee Creek was the lifeblood for the mission. It protected the mission because it was small enough that warships couldn't get into it, but canoes, large dugouts could go in and out and carry freight, and it would, they had egress, entrance and egress from the site. But now Wamasee Creek is washing the mission away, and it threatens not only the mission, but the pueblo, the villages that surrounded the mission. And right now we have no solution. We've looked at a number of different methods, like something we even thought about looking at moving the channel, which, I have grown up my whole life thinking of the salt marsh as something sacred that you don't touch. It's so valuable. There's less of it than there used to be. It must be protected. It's the most important thing. Well, this creek is cutting into a maritime forest. Well, maritime forests are important. They're listed as important forest types that are disappearing to our state. It's also cutting into Georgia's first church, or the site of, and eventually, in a century, the church itself, cutting into villages where people lived and prayed and worshiped at that site. So they said, well, let's move the channel. But by moving it, I've realized that where we would have, the only place we couldn't move it economically would aim the river right at another village site, an extension of this site. It would aim it into an old maritime forest, another old maritime forest, one of the rarest, Georgia's rarest trees, Florida soapberry, my wife and I recently found in that forest. So the idea, okay, well, if we move the channel, which is something we're doing, we're threatening another valuable place, another valuable forest, and we're also damaging marsh, which this creek isn't damaging marsh. So we said, okay, that won't work. So we looked at a number of options, and so now what we're going to do is take all of the backdirt piles from the different sites and fill sandbags and place sandbags, and we're using these rough kind of sandbags, and I've seen other places where they've been used, and they get covered in mud and they're hard to see, and oysters attach. And one of the things that the state of Georgia has been encouraging is where people try to stop erosion is to encourage a living shoreline. So we can get oysters attaching and soil grabbing. We hope that we can build a living seawall. It's not going to be something we'll do overnight, but as Dave is the archaeologist are looking at one place where the erosion is going on, we're going to try to be stopping it at another, where they have already sort of cataloged what is there. Because the main thing we don't want to lose is the information. And of course, we don't want to lose the church site itself, because it's a sacred space. The island is a place that the thing that I have been most proud of over the years, and that I think that our board members have been most proud of, is there's very little rivalry between the different programs. In fact, it's just the opposite. While these different programs are in competition for resources, they use those resources for each other's work as much as they use for their own. And that's the thing that when I came out of college, I was kind of cynical, because you see a lot of academia, there's a lot of competition and stuff. And so that was sort of a dream of mine, to be able to be part of a place where people were part of a team. And one of the first things Dave ever said is, there's no I in archaeology. And I always thought, yeah. And he and I years ago talked about, well, let's bring everybody in. Let's bring everybody in. And in my staff, when Dave Thomas is on the island, my staff, the island staff, they're all archaeologists. They're not digging, but they're providing support for archaeology. And when Dr. Bishop is heading up the sea turtle program, everybody's a turtle person. And they're part of it, and he keeps them informed, and they know what's going on, and they know what they can do to help him. So when he has a problem, rather than being that sort of nuisance that shows up for 5 months a year, he's their friend, and he's the guy they want to make successful. And so they're constantly listening out for the radio, they're doing this. So that to me is the earmark of St. Catherine's, is that entire, to me it's a complete spirit of, hey, what are you doing? How does that work? What can I do to make it more successful? And that's what our entire staff does. And it pleases me that that's what goes on there.